Did you ever have to pretend everything was fine when it really wasn't?
Do you know your true worth? Because on Sunday, my mother reminded me of mine again, right there at the table, with that same casual cruelty she has used my entire life. We were halfway through dinner when she looked across the table, compared me to my sister yet again, and said, "You'll never match Ashley's looks or success." She said it the way people comment on the weather, like it was just a fact floating in the air, not something that cuts deeper than any knife. I didn't fight back. I didn't raise my voice or roll my eyes. I simply stood up, stacked the plates, and cleared the table in silence. But that silence wasn't empty. It was the moment I decided I would never give her another chance to use my patience against me. The drive home that night was different from every other Sunday drive I had taken in years. Normally, I let the sting fade by Monday morning, convincing myself I should just ignore it because fighting her only makes her worse. But this time, I was done ignoring. While the radio played softly in the background, I started tallying, in my head, the things I have been paying for without recognition. My sister's phone line, still attached to the family plan I created when I was in college. The streaming services my mom insisted we all use together, which I pay for every month. The family groceries card that my mother has used for brunches, hair appointments, and club fees, all written off as if they were household needs. For years I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that these small things weren't breaking me. But Sunday night, every single dollar felt like proof of how they had mistaken me for someone easy to use. By the time I got home, I was no longer upset. I was sharp. I pulled up 3 months of statements on my laptop and started tagging every single expense. I didn't color code for feelings, only for facts: name, amount, description. It was like looking at my life with fresh eyes. I wasn't the struggling, invisible daughter she described. I was the one propping up her image of a perfect family. I was the one underwriting success. At midnight, I started canceling things. The streaming services? Gone. The shared accounts? Passwords changed. The family groceries card? Removed from autopay. My direct deposit? Redirected to a new account that no one else even knew existed. I wasn't burning bridges. I was locking doors that never should have been left open in the first place. The funny thing is, I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt sane. Every time I clicked remove payment method, it felt like I was putting air back in my own lungs. For years, I had convinced myself that being generous, being quiet, being the fixer was my role, and that it was the price of love. But what hit me in that moment was that love never required me to carry people who were perfectly capable of carrying themselves. On Monday morning, I sat at work sipping coffee when my phone lit up with 3 missed calls from Mom. Then a message from Ashley: "What did you do?" Mom is furious. I didn't even have to open my bank app to know. Somewhere between her gym membership and her country club brunch, the card had declined. She must have been humiliated, standing there in front of her friends, trying to figure out how her dependable daughter had let her down. What I wanted to text back to Ashley was simple: I didn't let her down. I stopped holding her up. But I didn't text that, not yet. Because silence was more powerful. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote one line across the top: "Generosity has a ledger." Underneath, I wrote every major holiday, every temporary loan, every time Mom had called me crying about money, and every time I had stepped in. I wasn't planning to throw it in her face. I was planning to remind myself that what I had given wasn't nothing. It was years of stability, disguised as invisibility. As I closed the notebook, I realized this wasn't about who was prettier or more successful. It wasn't about me being compared to Ashley. It was about the fact that they never saw me as the one holding everything together. And now they would. Because I had pulled the one thread that kept their version of the story from unraveling. The next morning, Ashley sent another message. Short. Almost hesitant. "Mom is saying you're out to embarrass her. Did you cancel her accounts?" I stared at the screen, coffee in hand, and felt a small smile creep in. I didn't type a single word. I let her sit with the silence. Because sometimes silence says more than shouting ever could. And while they scrambled to figure out what happened, I already knew what came next. The plate I didn't drop at Sunday dinner wasn't a sign of submission. It was my warning shot. And the ledger I had started writing? That was only the beginning. Because if my mother thought Sunday night was the last time I would be compared to Ashley without consequence, she had no idea what was coming next. The morning after the declined charges, while the house was still quiet and the city had that early hum that makes you think anything is possible if you start before everyone else, I opened my laptop, pulled the spiral notebook closer, and decided that if my mother wanted to keep score, then for once the score would be real, because I was done letting other people rename my effort as kindness, rename my money as family love, and rename my silence as consent, and since none of them seemed interested in facts, I would give them facts anyway, arranged in a way even they could not pretend to misunderstand. I went through bank statements and calendar entries and text threads, matching dates to charges and excuses to withdrawals, and I wrote a simple list that did not need color or flair: Thanksgiving groceries paid by me, gifts purchased on my card then wrapped as if they were from the family, home internet upgraded for everyone's Zoom, and quietly put on my name, emergency dental work. For Ashley's kid covered with my flexible spending account because we were told insurance was a mess that month and we will fix it later, which of course never happened, and I did not write any commentary because commentary was the trap. So I stuck to amounts, dates, and recipients, and when I finished the third month I could already see the pattern that my gut had always known but my mouth had never said out loud, which is that I have been the invisible sponsor of this little theater for years while being told I should smile more. By midday I had a clean printout and a second copy in an envelope, not for my mother because she would turn it into a performance about betrayal and tone, but for Ashley, because I wanted her to see the story without the usual spin. And I wanted to offer her a path out without humiliating her in public, which for our family is apparently considered rude only when I do it. I drove to the brunch planning meeting my mother had organized at a neighborhood place she loves, the kind of spot where the host knows her name and she is always placed near the front so friends can wave, and the moment I sat down she slipped into her usual role, telling a pair of committee ladies that Ashley just has a gift for hosting things and that I get a little tense around events, and she said it while looking at me the way someone looks at a toddler who has not learned to share. And I felt that old flush rise and then fall because this time it did not land the way she intended. This time it just sounded like someone trying to keep a story alive that had already expired. I waited for her to finish listing the menu options, and when she paused to sip her drink, I said in the calmest voice I have ever heard come out of my own mouth that I would not be contributing a cent to this brunch, that my name should be removed from any plan or speech, and that I wished them a pleasant celebration. Then I slid a small sealed envelope across the table to Ashley and told her she could open it whenever she wanted the full picture of how these events have actually been funded. And I stood up, thanked the ladies for their time, and left before dessert because I refused to sit through another round of be a team player, when being a team player in this family means write the check, take the blame, and wear a smile. In the car I took a breath that felt like the first honest breath of my adult life, and I drove home without music because I wanted to hear my own thoughts without a soundtrack telling me how to feel. And those thoughts were very simple. If people will not say thank you, you stop giving them chances to forget you. If people will not tell the truth, you write it down and hand it to them. And if people use your patience as a leash, you cut it and teach them how far you can walk without them. Halfway home my phone buzzed with a message from my mother so long it showed up as a wall of gray, and even without opening it I could guess the words because I have received versions of it my entire life. Why are you doing this? You are making me look bad. Real family does not itemize generosity. Your sister needs you to be supportive. How could you be so cold after everything I have done? Which is always said like a hymn, even when the melody is off. I did not answer, not because I wanted to torture her, but because I have learned that answering immediately only feeds the machine, and I want that machine to run out of fuel. Later that evening, after a quiet hour where I cooked something simple and sat at the table by myself with a glass of water like a grown woman who is not auditioning for anyone, Ashley texted a single line that hit me like a soft tap on the shoulder. What is in the envelope? And then a second line a few minutes later, should I open it now or when I am alone? And I realized this was the first time in years she had asked me for guidance without the echo of our mother in the background, so I told her to open it wherever she felt safe, to read slowly, and to notice that I did not add adjectives, only documentation. While she read, my mother created a group text that included both of us and her latest favorite cousin, and she sent a paragraph about family unity and another about how some people cannot stand seeing others shine, and finally the classic, "Do not engage with this nonsense," which made me laugh, because telling people not to engage is exactly what you say when you fear they might think for themselves. Ashley broke off from the group chat and messaged me directly, saying she had just seen a photocopy of a check from my old college leftovers made out to a makeup artist with family investment in the memo line. And she wanted to know if our mother had asked me before moving that money, and I answered in the only honest way I could, which was that I had been told it was temporary and that it would be replaced before I needed it, and that when I asked for it later I was told I was selfish for thinking about myself when the family had bigger dreams. There was a long pause, the kind that stretches across years of conditioning, and then Ashley wrote that she needed to think and that she did not want to fight with me, which for once felt like a door instead of a wall. Before I went to bed, I placed my ledger on the desk and drew a single line under the latest entry, because I wanted a clean space for whatever came next, and I knew it would come, since people who live on other people's silence cannot stand the sound of a closed mouth. I turned off the light, put my phone face down, and let the house be quiet, knowing that by morning the story would be trying to rewrite itself again, but also knowing that this time I had receipts and momentum and a simple promise to myself that I would not let anyone rename this as cruelty when it is, at last, fairness. The phone buzzed one more time in the dark, and I did not look, because I already knew what it was, a message from Ashley that would pull me into the next step whether I was ready or not. And all it said when I finally read it at dawn was the sentence I had been waiting to hear for years. If this is true, then we need to talk to Mom, because something is very, very wrong. When I woke up the next morning, I already knew the rhythm of the day was not going to resemble any of the thousands of ordinary Tuesdays I had dragged myself through in the past, because something had shifted that would not shift back. And instead of pretending I could calm the waters with another round of silence, I decided I would let the tide run in the direction of facts, which meant pulling credit reports, digging into archives, and refusing to let feelings drown out what numbers were spelling in black and white. I had spent too many years being told that the family way was not to document, not to confront, not to demand signatures, and certainly not to use words like terms or conditions, because in our house those words were treated like weapons. But the truth was that my mother had been holding them over me all along, wrapped in fake warmth, and if I wanted out, I had to unwrap them myself and use them properly. I logged into the credit bureau account I had set up years ago but rarely checked, and within 5 minutes I was staring at a detail that nearly made me choke on my coffee: a store card opened in my name, attached to a joint application with an address from the old family house, the same house I had left for good over a decade ago, and the balance had been paid off years earlier, but the record remained, clear as day, showing that someone had used my identity under the label of household purchases. I remembered the night in my early 20s when my mother had said, "You'll thank me later for letting you build credit," and I had believed her, thinking she meant she was co-signing to help me, not co-signing to help herself, and now, years later, here was the scar she left in the system, hidden but permanent, the kind that no amount of politeness could erase. I didn't cry, because tears felt like wasted water on something that could actually be fixed with phone calls and certified mail. So I called the bureau, filed the dispute, placed a fraud alert, and made sure I requested written confirmation, because I was done letting important conversations vanish into thin air without a record. When the agent asked if I suspected who might have opened the account, I simply said, a relative who should not have, because naming names on the phone felt premature, but in my head the certainty was so sharp it could cut glass. After that, I sat at my desk and drafted a letter with a formality I had never used in my personal life, a certified notice addressed to my mother, listing the totals I had documented from the so-called shared accounts, the charges siphoned from my college leftovers, and the unauthorized credit card, and I wrote in clear language that she had 30 days to propose a repayment plan or else I would be proceeding with a formal report. I did not use emotional words, not once, because I did not want to give her the pleasure of saying I was hysterical or dramatic. Instead, the letter read like something from a bank or an insurance adjuster, dry and undeniable, a tone she could not easily twist into guilt or obligation. Then I did something that made my hands tremble but also gave me a kind of peace I had never felt before. I updated my healthcare proxy and removed my mother as the person authorized to make decisions if anything happened to me. Because after years of convincing myself that was only symbolic, I finally understood it was an open door she should never have held the key to. I named a close friend, someone steady, someone who would never use family duty as a way to control me, and while I was at it, I updated my will, signed new beneficiary designations, and changed my emergency contact at work. The idea that my mother could no longer claim authority over my body, my bank, or my job was more liberating than any speech I could have shouted at a dinner table. In the afternoon, I drove to the post office, sent the certified packet with return receipt, and then drove straight to Ashley's place, leaving a second copy in her mailbox, labeled, "For your records, because you were a beneficiary at points without being told." I wanted her to see it not as a weapon, but as proof that I was not inventing grievances in my head, that there was paper to back every sentence I had said, and I wanted her to feel the weight of it without my mother standing between us spinning a story. That night my phone rang 3 times in a row. I let it buzz until it went to voicemail. Then it rang again. I finally answered, and on the other end was my mother's voice, thick with a practiced sob, accusing me of trying to destroy the family, saying I was cruel, saying I was breaking her heart, saying things she has rehearsed 100 times in different keys. And I listened without interruption, because listening is easier when you already know you are not going to bend. When she paused, waiting for me to apologize, I said only one sentence: "Check your mail in 2 days and read it carefully." Then I hung up. Minutes later, a new text from Ashley appeared, stripped of punctuation, almost like she had been typing with shaking hands. "Mom won't stop crying. What happened? What did you send her?" And for once I did not feel the familiar surge of shame at being the cause of the tears, because I finally understood that I was not the cause. I was only the mirror, and the truth reflecting back at them was theirs to face, not mine to swallow. As I put my phone on silent and turned out the lights, I realized I was no longer the quiet child clearing plates while insults floated across the table. I had become the adult who wrote terms, set deadlines, and forced clarity, and whether they accepted it or not, this was the new language of our family, and it was not going away. By the time another week had passed, the silence in our family group chat had become so thick it felt like an extra presence in every room I entered. And even though I had not responded to the crying voicemails or the scattered accusations that appeared at random hours, I knew that my mother was already rewriting the narrative for anyone who would listen, because image had always been her most treasured currency. And she never let inconvenient facts get in the way of a good story. I had grown up watching her step into church meetings, book club gatherings, or community fundraisers with that polished smile that suggested she was the kind of woman who had raised 2 perfect daughters and kept her household not only intact but thriving. And for years I believed that version of her because I was too busy carrying the invisible costs to notice that her stories rarely lined up with the receipts in my drawer. Now that I had pulled back the curtain, I could practically hear the gears turning. As she worked to protect her reputation, and for the first time in my life I was not afraid of it, because I finally understood that the truth does not need to shout when the evidence has already been mailed. Still, I also knew that reputation has a strange power in small communities, where gossip can spread faster than fact, and I had no intention of letting her frame me as the bitter daughter who tried to ruin family traditions. That was why, instead of storming into the next church committee meeting to argue with her in public, I chose something cleaner, something that would rewrite the story without me having to lift my voice at all. My grandmother's name had been used for years in one of my mother's favorite anecdotes about starting a scholarship fund in her honor, a tale she rolled out at holidays and church events as proof that our family cared about education and opportunity. The problem was, the scholarship had never actually existed. It was just an idea she repeated often enough that people assumed it was real. So I called the church office directly, explained that I wanted to create a modest scholarship in my grandmother's name with very specific rules that no relatives could benefit, and I transferred the funds quietly, asking only that the announcement be made in the church newsletter without attaching my name. Within a week, the fund was real, documented, and registered, and the next time someone asked about it, the story would no longer belong to my mother's imagination, it would belong to the records. At the same time, I decided to deal with another piece of family theater that had been hanging over me for months, the grandmother's ring, which my mother had been parading at events, hinting that she would one day present it to Ashley in a dramatic gesture of approval. It wasn't just a ring, it was a symbol of how she liked to stage inheritance like a prize for obedience, and I refused to play along. So I placed the ring in a secure envelope, included a short, professional letter drafted by my lawyer stating that heirlooms should never be used as public props, and had a courier deliver it directly to her doorstep. There was no dramatic scene, no shouting match, no begging for it back. Just a quiet removal of another piece from her stage. I could feel her scrambling when her texts became frantic and inconsistent, alternating between pleas for forgiveness and angry declarations that I was cold-hearted. But the real confirmation came 2 Sundays later when the church newsletter went out. In the announcements section, a note appeared thanking an anonymous donor for funding the new scholarship in my grandmother's name, with details about application criteria and deadlines. I knew the moment my mother read it she would realize her favorite story had been taken out of her hands, and that for once she could not control how people perceived her, because perception had been replaced by fact. I did not need to be there to watch her reaction. The silence that followed told me enough. Around that same time, I also posted a short message on my private social account, not directed at anyone by name, but written in plain language about adulthood, boundaries, and the difference between love and obligation. I said that generosity without honesty is exploitation, that family is not defined by who shares a last name, but by who respects your no. And that at some point, every grown child has to decide whether they want to keep playing roles written for them or write their own script. It was not a rant, not even long, but it was enough to spark quiet messages from friends who said they understood exactly what I meant. For the first time, I felt like I had spoken in my own voice rather than the filtered, edited one I had been trained to use. Of course, my mother heard about it. She always does. Within hours, she sent me a long message accusing me of humiliating her in front of her friends, saying the timing was cruel, saying people were calling her to ask questions she could not answer, and insisting that I had no right to air dirty laundry. What she didn't seem to grasp was that I hadn't aired laundry at all. I had simply reminded myself, and anyone else who cared to listen, that clean clothes don't need to be hidden, only dirty ones do. The fallout spread faster than I expected. A family friend called Ashley and asked why the scholarship was just now being announced when Diane had been talking about it for years, and Ashley, caught between loyalty and shock, demanded that I meet her in person to fix this before Mom has a breakdown. Her voice cracked on the phone, not because she believed I was wrong, but because she finally realized that the story she had been raised on might not be true, and admitting that meant admitting that the pedestal she had been placed on wasn't as stable as she thought. I agreed to meet, not because I intended to apologize, but because I wanted her to see what it looked like when someone refused to back down from truth. As I hung up, I realized something important. For the first time, my mother wasn't just fighting me, she was fighting the collapse of the entire myth she had spent decades building. And the more she fought, the more cracks appeared in her story. That night, as I set my phone on silent again, I understood that the story people tell is only as strong as the evidence behind it, and for the first time in years, the evidence was mine. I wasn't shouting, I wasn't crying, and I wasn't begging anyone to believe me. I was just letting the facts stand, and the facts were louder than her performance could ever be. When Ashley asked me to meet at the house because we need to stop this before Mom falls apart, I agreed. Not because I was trying to soothe anyone back to sleep, but because I was done being the quiet daughter who cleans up messes while the people who made them give speeches about family loyalty. And I wanted my sister to see that my calm was not cruelty, but a discipline I taught myself in order to survive the way our mother learned to confuse love with control. So I drove over on a Saturday afternoon with a folder in my bag and a simple plan in my head that did not require shouting, performance, or permission. The living room looked unchanged in the way rooms that host the same conversations for decades always look unchanged, and my mother launched into her opening statement before I even sat down. A careful blend of trembling voice and pointed jabs about daughters who forget where they came from, and I let her talk for as long as she needed, because I have learned that performances collapse faster when the audience does not clap on cue. When she finally paused for sympathy, I placed my phone on the coffee table, hit record, and then immediately hit stop, which made her jump as if I had pulled a fire alarm, and I said, without anger, that the little timestamp was not a threat or a trick, but a line in the sand, because I wanted a single moment in this house that would not be rewritten 2 days from now as something kinder to the performer and uglier toward the witness. Ashley sat with her hands clenched, struggling to arrange loyalty and logic on the same shelf, and asked me in a voice I had not heard since we were teenagers if I could please be specific. So I opened the folder and slid across 3 things I had set aside weeks earlier, because I knew we would end up here no matter how careful I had been to avoid it. The copies of checks drawn from the college leftovers that had been labeled as family investment and spent on Ashley's early rebrand. The credit report page showing the store card opened in my name attached to the old house address, and a short typed summary of the charges from the so-called family groceries account that mapped perfectly onto our mother's social calendar for hair, brunches, and club dues. My mother tried to roll her eyes and call it petty, the way she always does when documents interrupt a story, yet I saw something falter when she noticed that none of the pages were annotated with accusations or adjectives, because there is not much to argue with when the handwriting is yours, the signatures are yours, and the dates align with events you bragged about later. Before the tearful defense could begin, I added one final item that I had kept to myself while I confirmed and reconfirmed, because I did not want to be reckless with something that heavy. A short voicemail I had found on Dad's old email backup, recorded in the months after his stroke, where his voice is slower than the one I grew up with, but still steady enough to say plainly that he felt pressured to sign beneficiary changes he did not understand, and that the plan was to clean it up later, when he was better, which of course never happened because later is the safest place to bury mistakes that benefit the people in charge. I hit play on the recording and watched the room change shape, because even a long-practiced performance has trouble competing with a voice you cannot bully, and when it ended, Ashley turned to our mother and asked a question I had waited years to hear her ask, which was whether any of this was true, not dressed up in family language or decorated with excuses, but true, yes or no, and the space between the question and the answer felt like the last mile of a marathon you did not realize you had been running since childhood. My mother stumbled into the line she always uses when evidence corners her, something about family investment and intentions, and how she only did what was best for us. So I slid across 2 more pages that formed the spine of the plan she never expected me to have, because the old me would have begged or argued, but the person I had become dealt in signed paper and clear timelines. A notarized statement declining any claim I might have on the house or on assets tied to it, which removed her favorite accusation that I was scheming for property, and a prepared acknowledgement listing the amounts drawn from my accounts, the unauthorized credit applications, and the misuse of funds labeled for my education, coupled with a single paragraph apologizing to both daughters for turning us into rivals to keep herself in control, and a section for her signature with a date and a witness line. I did not raise my voice when I explained the terms, because the words did not need volume to carry weight. I told her she had 1 week to sign the acknowledgement in front of a notary and to send me a scanned copy, and that if she chose not to sign, the report I had already drafted would be submitted to the appropriate places, and the packet would also be shared with the attorney who was prepared to advise me on the next steps. Ashley asked me if I was serious, and when I said yes, she looked at the ring on our mother's hand and then at the envelope on the mantel that still held the courier's letter from the week before. And something in her settled like a person choosing a chair after standing in a crowded room for too long. My mother asked if this was blackmail, and I told her no, that blackmail is secret and dirty and designed to humiliate, while this was clean and open and designed to end a pattern. Which is why I had also created a small insurance policy that did not rely on threats or endless negotiations. A scheduled email containing a cloud link to the documents that would auto-send to my attorney and to Ashley if the signed acknowledgement did not arrive within 7 days, which meant that whether she signed or not, the hiding was over, and the days of me being the unpaid district attorney for our family were finished. She called me heartless and ungrateful, and I let the words fall to the carpet like old confetti, because I had learned that people who thrive on crisis often throw glitter on cruelty and call it tradition. The minutes dragged and then snapped, the way hard conversations do when they hit the point where everyone understands that tomorrow will not look like yesterday, and in that quiet the most surprising thing in the entire afternoon happened, which was not that my mother reached for a pen or that Ashley finally spoke to me as a partner, but that I felt nothing resembling triumph or grief, only relief that I had finally stopped performing the role I was assigned, because the win I wanted was not to watch my mother crack, but to watch myself leave the house without reaching back for the leash I had worn for years. She signed the acknowledgement with shaky hands, not because she accepted accountability in her soul, but because paper finally outranked story, and Ashley whispered that she would drive her to the notary on Monday and that she would make sure a copy got to me. And the strangest part was how small the moment felt after all the rehearsals in my head, like I had been pushing a door that had never been locked, only painted shut with layers of guilt and praise. I stood, thanked Ashley for listening without the costume on, and said to my mother, without venom or softness, that if she wanted to call me cruel for removing my name as her emergency contact and for funding the scholarship she had used as a prop, she could keep that story if it helped her sleep, but I would not be returning to it, and I would not be rewriting it when she needed a better version for company. The next morning, before the sun had fully climbed, Ashley texted that Mom would not stop crying and wanted to know what happened, and I typed back a sentence that felt like a hinge closing on a very old door, telling her that the truth had finally landed where it belonged and that the rest was up to the people who had been keeping it in the air for this many years. And then I put my phone down, made coffee in my own kitchen, and sat at my own table in a house that felt different not because furniture had moved, but because I had, which is how I knew I had one, not with a scene or a speech, but with a plan that made their favorite stage go quiet and left me free to walk away without carrying the plates.